Okay. Good questions, and let me see if I can restate that for everybody. So I think the question was, when dealing with a cloud service provider, how do we ensure that at the end of the relationship, the information that the cloud service provider is holding for us effectively is disposed of in the way we require it to be disposed of, number one. Number two, if the cloud service provider is dealing with third parties, contractors downstream, how do we ensure that they are complying with the same obligations that we're imposing upon the cloud service provider, if I understand the question correctly. And these are excellent questions. And what I would suggest here is there's a few different ways in which we can do this. The first begins when we go back to phase 2. Okay? Here it's where we're going to conduct actually it's here, the level of assurance analysis. Okay? Here's really where we want to spend some time digging deep into the cloud provider's operations to understand exactly how they're going to do the disposal at the end. Okay? And there are a number of information security standards out there. In the US, there's a few standards. There's a few standards in the EU. There's some international standards as well. And oftentimes, what I find is key is to get those assurances at that point that they comply with these standards regarding disposal. Okay? And obviously you want to have these things built into the contract, but I think your question goes more to the contract's great, but do we really know it's happening? Because we can't know for sure just because the contract obligates it. I find that if you have a particular vendor that receives certification from one of these standards bodies regarding disposal specifically, that's a good way to get some sort of comfort, because those third-party certifiers need to conduct an extremely exhaustive analysis and audit of the cloud provider systems to ensure that they're actually doing these things. It may not be feasible for your agency to go on site and travel, especially if it's in a different jurisdiction, to conduct an audit, right? We just don't have the time and resources to do that. So we can rely upon these separate third-party certifiers to do that in many cases. So that's the first thing. The second thing is regarding downstream third-party contractors. In one way I approach this, and again, it depends upon the sensitivity of the data, is I'll just contractually prohibit any third-party subcontractors. Just say you can't do it. If we're going to have sensitive information regarding intelligence, any other type of highly classified or sensitive information, I'm not going to permit you to have any third-party contractor unless I specifically approve it in writing. And that approval is going to be dependent upon those same steps that we're doing here, and have those steps conducted with the third-party contractor. The net of this is you're never going to have 100% security and 100% assurance that you're going to have these things met. Anytime you're dealing with anyone in the cloud, and I'm going to speak on this tomorrow afternoon regarding cloud service providers. It's a shameless plug for my presentation tomorrow. You're going to be taking a chance, and in many cases, it may not be worth even using a cloud service provider. If you've got something that's sensitive and the risk of breach is so high that there's going to be a true crisis in the event of a breach, again, it may not be up to us to make that determination, but it's something to raise, I think. If you can't get those level of assurances at this stage, it may not be even worth going into the cloud.
Dan, thank you. That was a great answer. I know you still have a couple more slides, but we have 3 questions. How do you want to proceed? Do you think you can wrap up the slides and then we go to the questions, or you want to, you would like me to just go into the questions?
Why don't we do the questions? And what I will say is, for those of you that are actually here, you get the bonus materials, the stuff that's actually not in the materials. I do have a few extra slides. So because we're not getting to it, my contact information is at the end here. Or if you want to come up afterwards and ask me, I'm happy to provide you with those extra slides. Like I said, it involves some case studies and some also some top 10 takeaways that I think might be helpful. So, feel free. But let's take the questions.
Thank you, Dan. That's fantastic. And some of you did mention that you're having some difficulty accessing the PowerPoint presentation. Don't worry, we are aware of some of the technical difficulties. We're working on it. Let me go straight into the questions, and then I'll make some closing points. Question: not every government has a Dan Pepper on hand when there's a problem. with supplier in IT information security. If we already have contracts in place without appropriate IT security monitoring, can you spell out maybe 3 or 4 steps to remedy that?
Yes. And I will tell you that this is not an uncommon problem. A client of mine actually goes through updated security guidelines and classifications on a regular basis every couple of years. And they've got contracts already in place with suppliers which don't have those latest and greatest security guidelines or perhaps don't have anything. And usually in those situations, what we will do is we will go ahead and take it upon ourselves to say, look, we've got new guidelines and you need to comply with these if you want to continue to provide products or services to us. And give them an opportunity of a certain amount of time to make the decision of whether they can or can't. They may come back and say, look, we've got a contract. We don't have to do these things. On the other side of it is, well, look, if you want a continued relationship with us in the future, we strongly, strongly suggest you comply with these things now. Okay? There are a couple other ways to do this. You may want to, at that point, see what information, if the supplier can't comply with these new guidelines, what can you start to bring in-house? Okay, what stuff can you do with your own internal IT department to comply with these things if your vendor can't? Especially key if there's a change in law or legislation or regulation which requires heightened security and that third party can't comply with it, you may have to pull it in-house in order to comply with these regulations. Okay?
Thank you, Dan. Great answer. Here's the next one. In terms of information security, are there standard service levels on information security available in the public domain, perhaps classified by sector, that public procurement professionals can access and include in their RFPs? Sometimes we just don't know what to request from the bidders. Good
question. In the U.S., there are a set of standards from the National Information Security NIST. I forget what the T stands for, but it's NIST for short. If you Google NIST, you'll see an extremely broad set of standards by almost every sector and type of security classification, asset class, you name it. That being said, in certain departments and divisions, there may be specific regulations that affect security. So in the U.S., for example, you have a set of regulations that apply to healthcare information, patient information. You have a separate set of regulations that apply to financial information. So in your particular situation, you may have specific regulations that may already be in place. But if, in the absence of that, I find that the NIST is probably the most comprehensive set of guidelines, which are a good place to start.
Terrific. One more. This one's a little bit long. Here we go. What kind of language or contracts management discussion can we include in the contract lifecycle to ensure that, 1, we will be notified if there's an IT breach, and 2, the company we work with will adequately manage IT security breaches and report to us in a timely manner, plus put in place appropriate mitigation measures all along? Our contract management professionals don't all have IT security planning training. Right.
Well, so there's a lot there. Short answer, as best as I can describe in the time we have. I mentioned in one of the slides the importance of having an ongoing interactive set of communication with the vendor. And that includes having things like audit logs in place and having access to these audit logs on a regular basis. I usually require that we can have access to these logs on a daily or even hourly basis to see exactly what's going on, to see what type of breaches or even attempts at a security breach are occurring, so that we're not relying exclusively on the vendor to provide that information. Because let's face it, the vendor has limited resources, or they forget, or they don't have the administration in place to do this. We need to take it upon ourselves to ensure that we have ongoing access to this information. In the event that there is a security breach, we can see it in the audit logs, and in many cases, in some cases even by regulation, we have an obligation to notify those that are affected by the security breach and take certain remedial action. Okay, so we want to have the ability to conduct audits as well, so we can actually determine whether there's been a breach. But yeah, can we rely upon the vendor in each case to give us that information? Probably not. So getting that information ourselves, we can even let the vendor know ourselves, hey, look, we're the ones seeing this breach in our security logs. We need you to become involved now and to do your part either contractually or give us the ability to do what we need to do remedially, including sending out breach notifications.
Thank you, Dan. And just one more. Any specific training that you would like to recommend for contracts professionals or procurement professionals that is offered perhaps on an annual basis through certain associations that we can look to?
So I mentioned the NIST standards. There are a whole host of different agencies and companies out there that will actually provide training on those NIST security classifications. There's certain, I know, certifications that can be obtained as well on these types of security classifications, information security protection, and so forth. There's a lot of sources out there for it, but I think, like I said, NIST is probably the best place to start, and you'll find lots of different resources for it.